lots of different faces, which is really awesome. Looking forward to catching up with you and getting to meet as many of you as we can while we're here. We've been coming here since the start, but we love it here. So I'm going to get you to open to 2 Kings, please, chapter 22. Asher, some of you might know my oldest son was doing Year 12 last year, and it was his. He was doing ancient studies, and I got to proofread some of his essays for him. Not that I needed to in the end, because they gave him the school prize for ancient studies. So just a little dad brag there, but it's not something I got into at his age, like into ancient history and reading about Hannibal and Carthage and Rome and the Punic Wars and all this sort of stuff, but it just sort of inspired me to take a little bit of a deeper dive into Ezekiel, which we're going to have a look at tonight, and in 18 minutes. Just that all of that ancient studies stuff, it's all sort of set in a similar time period, and there's a real richness to what we have here, and sort of understanding the context and the timing of it all is really important as well. So I'm going to try and do 9 minutes of setup and 9 minutes of knockdown. 9 minutes of sort of context, and then get into some points from that. So. One commentator sort of talks about Ezekiel, I saw, as an apocalyptic book. It's quite dark and profound in some ways. It's got lots of bizarre visions, and you can sort of see Ezekiel grappling with trying to describe things that he's seeing, that the Lord is showing him, that is very hard to write down. We read about 4 creatures. Oh, sorry, I should set a timer. There's no timer anywhere else, is there? I'll do that. We read about him seeing 4 creatures, each with 4 different faces, about these strange combinations of maybe cosmic wheels within wheels, and there's symbolism and meaning to all of it. So we're going to have... in the time that we've got, a splash around in the shallow end of a very deep pool. But I just want to start by setting the scene a little bit about who he is. He was born into the tribe of Levi, so his life was always going to be about work in the temple. His expectation as a child would have been that he might grow up to be a teacher, or involved in preparing sacrifices to the Lord, a musician, a gatekeeper, a guardian, a temple official, a judge, or a craftsman making things for the temple. So that was sort of his expectation as a child, and I guess he grows up at a pretty special time that I want to read about here, because actually, I'm going to go back a step. Something I didn't realise when I was younger is that there's a lot of books in the Bible, and there's things that are happening at the same time. So we're going to talk about Ezekiel, which is 14 books after 2 Kings. And maybe you all know this, but for those that don't, I'll say it anyway, that what we're reading about here is happening in the time of Ezekiel. So you got to kind of take that 14 books ahead and overlay it with what's written back here if you want to understand the context of it. So this is just the order of the books in the Bible, but all the prophets all happened around this time, so you have to sort of take them and drag them back to put them in place. So after King David, whose life we know really well, he was an amazing king, and not without his flaws, of course, but after David came hundreds of years of bad leadership in the kingdom of Israel. And it was divided into Israel and Judah. But here we find Ezekiel growing up at actually a special time, because we'll read in 2 Kings chapter 22, Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. Do we have any 8-year-olds here tonight? Anyone who's 8? Anyone who's game to put, oh yeah, who's that? Can you put your hand up? Yeah, you have. Can you stand up? Is that Ned? We got King Ned at the back. Can you stand up, Ned? Can everyone see Ned? He's just been made king. 8 years old. Well done, Ned. You can sit down now. We'll give you a round of applause. Now, unfortunately for Ned, or Josiah in this case, his dad was a bad egg. Sorry, his dad and his grandfather too. So Ezekiel's... Where's Brad? No, I couldn't have planned that. That was Ned's fault. Oh, wow. So, bad dad, bad granddad. Along comes Josiah as an 8-year-old gets made king. And it says in verse 2, and he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord and walked in all the way of David his father, or forefather, not his father, but he had to look a bit further back for a good example. And he turned not aside to the right hand or to the left. And I'll read, just go forward one more chapter in verse 25. And like unto him was there no king before him that turned to the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, neither after him arose there any like Ned. So this is the time at which Ezekiel was growing up. And so just sort of setting the scene of his expectation, being born to the tribe of Levi, expecting that that's going to be his job and his life. He's got a good king at last, in the scheme of things. But when he's 13, Josiah is killed in battle. He's only 39, and things start to go downhill again. And so all of a sudden, this shining light in a bad line of kings is gone, and the Bible actually says that, calls Nebuchadnezzar, he says, my servant Nebuchadnezzar in Jeremiah. The Lord was so disappointed with this line of kings that had made a mockery of everything that he'd set up, that he gets Nebuchadnezzar to come in. And so when Ezekiel gets to 17, the good king dies. 4 years later, Nebuchadnezzar comes in from Babylon and takes the leaders and all the brightest youth. And this is the way that Nebuchadnezzar conquered his enemies, was to come in to the country, take the current leaders and the next generation of leaders, and he would take them back to Babylon, give them new names, and try and convert them to Babylonian culture so that he could send them back to their homes. Hopefully they were now beaten into submission and assimilated into the Babylonian culture and loyal to Babylon. So he didn't have to look after them. He could just push them back. I now own that country as well, being run by the people that I brainwashed. Babylon the greatest. So, and we know that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not their real names. They actually had Hebrew names before that. And Belteshazzar, you might remember, it was a name that was given to Daniel. In this case, it doesn't work. So the king gets taken to Babylon at the time, Jehoiakim, I think. He gets beaten down and sent back, but when he gets back home, he rebels to the point that Nebuchadnezzar just comes in and smashes him. He's just like, all right, this hasn't worked. And he takes 20,000 people, and all that was left was the poorest of the land. And I want to take you to Psalm 137, just to read a bit about where they got to. It says, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof, for there they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. And if I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. This, the songs of Zion. You'd have to think that the surrounding nations knew the songs of Zion. They must have heard the stories that there is a God in Israel, that the mighty Egyptian empire had been humbled, that the Red Sea had been opened, that the walls of Jericho had been brought down, that the inhabitants of the land of Canaan had been driven out because he promised the land to his own people. This is the songs of Zion. And yet we're in this terrible place where in the generations after they'd forgotten the Lord to the point where the Lord said, I've got to teach you. We can't leave things like this. And so he brings in Nebuchadnezzar, and they're now in this place. I want to read you a quote from a historian about exile. It says, "Exile, it is not simply being homeless. Rather, it is knowing that you do have a home, but that your home has been taken over by enemies. Exile, it is not being without roots. On the contrary, it is having deep roots which have now been plucked up, and there you are with roots dangling, writhing in pain, exposed to a cold and jeering world, longing to be restored to native and nurturing soil. Exile is knowing precisely where you belong, but knowing that you can't go back, not yet." Really, I thought it was a good description. And this is where they found themselves. It reminds me, actually, I'll embarrass him. I remember the stories in the book of Daniel are very exciting stories to read to your kids if you've got little ones. There's just a great series of them there. And I remember setting this same scene for the kids. Jarrah was really little, the others were a little bit older. And after I'd finished reading this Psalm 137 that we just read, I turned to him and he's got tears going down his cheeks. And I said, "What's up, buddy? You all right?" And he says, "I want them to be happy again so they can sing again." And I don't know, it paints this really clear picture of this tough love from the Lord. And that's really what I want to talk about with Ezekiel. All right, I'm moving on. Let's go to Ezekiel chapter 1. So Babylon was a beautiful city, a very famous city, and there were canals that went outside, and when they brought the 20,000 captives in, they set them up in tents alongside these canals. And this is where we hear about Ezekiel. This is where he ended up being from the age of 17. And he gets to the age of 30, and this is really significant because at the age of 30, it's the age that a Levite would begin to serve in the temple. And here he is, living in tents in a foreign land, exiled, like we just read. Let's read Ezekiel chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, "Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river of Chebar," that's one of these canals, "that the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King of Jehoiakim's captivity, the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and the hand of the Lord was there upon him." And it goes on into the bizarre visions that we mentioned before. He's shown God's glory here, and maybe I'll just read one verse. In verse 28 it says, "And as the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud in the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness round about. And it was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard a voice of one that spake." So there's this thing that the Lord's shown him here of the symbolism of hope with the rainbow we know, but also the cloud of God's judgment is still here and very much happening at this time. So he's 30 years old, and the Lord has given him a really clear calling here. And it goes on, and I guess that his calling is almost like a performance artist. Like the Lord really wants to get the attention of the children of Israel. He gets Ezekiel to do all sorts of strange things. He eats food cooked over dung and then eats it. He lays motionless on his side for 430 days, one day for each year of Israel's sin and Israel and Judah's sins. And there's heaps more to it, but the message that the Lord's trying to give them, and they can't, and they can't ignore the fact of what he's doing here, living amongst them in the tents, is that it's God's judgment on Israel first, then God's judgment on the enemy nations, and then God's redemption for Israel. And that's the message that you see played out in there. And you get the picture that at the time, the children of Israel weren't getting it, that they blame God, they blame the Babylonians, but there's no self-reflection on where they might have gone wrong themselves. And so Ezekiel goes through all these demonstrations for them. I've got to start relating this to us. So we've got, might get you to turn to Ezekiel 34. The blame thing is interesting, and I guess when we talk about God's tough love, Ezekiel's name, which is only recorded twice in the Bible, interestingly, it means God strengthens, or strengthened by God. And this is, at a really difficult time, that was the intention of everything that he did and the message that he was given. And in terms of tough love for us, when we get pulled up or corrected on something, sometimes it can become a much bigger problem for us than it needs to be. Because there's this mechanism that works in us that when we feel blamed, it hurts. And if we let ourselves become distracted by the way that things hurt, then we can think all sorts of other things that actually stop us from learning the thing that the Lord's trying to teach us. And maybe it's with tough love like here. And like the children of Israel, our mechanism might be to shift the blame because it's uncomfortable to feel the blame on ourselves. And yet, the only way to learn, we will not learn anything if we focus on what other people are responsible for. We can't change anyone else, but we can take the responsibility on our own selves, like the children of Israel needed to do here, and bring our own selves into line with God. Let's race to Ezekiel 34. I'm just going to explain it. It talks about the woe unto the shepherds first, talking about the bad kings of Israel. But it goes through the disease. Have you not strengthened, neither have you healed that which was sick? You didn't do this, you didn't do that. Right. Let's go to verse 11, and it says, we'll go to verse 23. And I will set up one shepherd over them, and even he shall feed them, even my servant David. He shall feed them, and he shall be their shepherd, and I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David, a prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken it. Let's go to the book of John, chapter 10. And I want you to think about what we just read, that the shepherd, even my servant David, was dead and buried by that time. He's not talking about David, he's talking about someone else. And you probably know who that is. And the man himself says it here. In John 10, verse 7, and Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep. All that came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door, for by me, if any man shall enter, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. And in verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. This is David that's talked about in Ezekiel 34. And Jesus, this is the gospel of the shepherd king. And when we speak to, it talks in Ezekiel 34 about the needs of the sheep. And when we speak to discouraged people, maybe people can find themselves in a strange land in their life. Maybe they've forgotten the songs of Zion. And maybe for us, that's forgetting what the Lord has done in the past and being consumed with what's happening now. We need to speak this message, the same as Ezekiel, to those who are discouraged and to the whosoever. that this message, it even talks in here about, regardless of how people react, and you can think how people would have reacted to the stuff that Ezekiel was doing. Luckily, we don't have to do that. But it says to let our forehead be stronger than their forehead. We don't have time to turn there, but Ezekiel 36, no, it's all right, I'll leave it. Is that Chewy? One other thing I was just going to say is that through tribulation, the songs of Zion maybe aren't so easy to sing. That our hearts can fail us, and like I said just a moment ago, what surrounds us now can be more distracting than the things that we know that the Lord has done for us in the past. One thing I thought, I've just noticed in myself, it's very common for people to ask you how you are or what you've been up to. And I've just been using it, and not to judge at all, because in that situation, your mind's going 100 miles an hour, you're thinking, oh, what should I talk about? How's this conversation going to go, whatever. But I've been using it as a little barometer on myself to just do a little check-in about when people ask me that question. You bump into someone and someone says, how you going, what have you been up to? There's no time for filtering, really. Well, my mind works slow, so it's not filtered very well. But what is living rent-free in the very front of your mind when you're interrupted and asked that question? And how far down the queue are the songs of Zion? It's just something that I've been thinking about in myself, that you get knocked out of whatever you're doing to think and reflect for a moment, and maybe that's something that we should do for ourselves, to actively think about what's gonna live rent free in the front of our minds, and how far towards the front the Songs of Zion should be. I just want to read one more verse out of another translation, then I'll get off. It's also in Ezekiel. He said, "Son of man, let all my words sink deep into your own heart first. Listen to them carefully for yourself, and then go to your people in exile and say to them, this is what the Sovereign Lord says. Do this whether they listen to you or not. Let my words sink deep into your own heart first." I think that's a really important point, that we have to know this message and love this message and live this message, that our conviction through the Holy Spirit is able to overcome all of our own doubts and shortcomings. The Lord found this guy in the land of the enemy with no temple to serve in, but he gave him a job to do at exactly the right time. And the same way he's given us a job to do, and our message is just as powerful as his, because it's the same message. And even more so now, what the Lord is trying to draw people's attention to is the message of his Son on the cross. And it's a message that we know has set us free, and we know can set them free. The message in Ezekiel is that those who reject the message, God will judge. Those who love the message, God will restore. Let's love the message and let God's tough love work in us. God's put in the rest of, just thinking about the whosoever as well, just for one last moment. God's put in his own creation the desire to find him, but we know that the devil wants to keep the people in this world absorbed in believing their own false names, their Babylonian names, assimilated into that culture. So let's bring that message to them and share it. And with the hardest of foreheads, let's keep singing the songs of Zion, and may they strike fear into the hearts of the devil, and may the songs of Zion bring courage to us, and then they hear them. And all people said?